For most of us, there is a story that is playing in our head right now. And it might be a story that you never even consciously wrote. And it might be one of the most reliable predictors of how you behave the next time that there's a stressful situation or something kind of goes wrong in your life. And it is very likely running inside of everyone that you've ever loved, everyone that you've ever worked for or argued with. First, we need to cover what are these behavioral looping emotional patterns that we have. In behavior profiling, we call these story loops. And a loop is essentially just an internal repeating narrative that we run about ourselves. And it's one that usually was written during an emotionally intense formative experience, often decades ago. What happens is that experience now often organizes exactly how we interpret new events and what territory that we defend. We get into confrontations and arguments and things like this. It's pretty simple. There's 3 properties that define it. The first aspect of it is that it's semi-conscious. Most of us can sense it, but we can rarely actually see it clearly because it's old. It wasn't written yesterday. It was written during a moment when our nervous system was trying to figure out how to really stay safe. And the story that it came up with in our head or in our body and our brain is something that really stuck with us. And it functions sort of as an identity armor. So most of us defend it more vigorously than we actually defend our perceived interests or what we think that we're defending in a particular situation. So here's the reframe that I want you to really sit with, because in my opinion, this is the part that actually matters. The loop is fundamentally not a flaw, because at the time that it was written, it was the safest option that your nervous system could come up with. Essentially, it kept you intact at a time when maybe things were difficult for you. And the question now isn't, was it bad? The question that we actually need to be asking is this a belief or a loop that is still serving you in your day-to-day life? Is it still actually making your life better? Or is it maybe making your life worse? There are essentially 5 primary loop types that we have at NCI University, and these were all designed by Chase Hughes. Each one is anchored in a different category of fear, and each produces a very recognizable pattern of speech and behavior. If we get good at recognizing what these are, we can listen for which one of these starts to feel familiar in our own bodies and maybe in some of our relationship patterns throughout our life. And I'm willing to bet that at least one will. So number 1 is the validation loop. This has a signature line, which is, I just want to make sure that I'm doing it right. And the fear underneath is being invisible, of showing up earnestly and not being noticed. And most people who are running a validation loop often tend to ask if their effort is even registering at all. And often they tend to replay small interactions for any minute even sign of disapproval. So they often carry a quiet and unrecognized exhaustion because they're always doing this work that nobody acknowledged fully. And anytime that work went unacknowledged, even if they were really well paid or really well compensated, they still feel this emptiness inside of them, and they feel this anxiety and this stress unless they're constantly getting that validation. Number 2 is the control loop. And the signature line is, all right, I really need to know what am I actually walking into. And the fear underneath for this person is unpredictability, or that maybe someone might betray them, or an organization might betray them, or put them in a situation where they're not safe. And people running this loop, what they tend is to need the agenda in advance. And they'd often rather do it themselves than delegate that out, because then they're going to have more confidence that it'll actually be done. And they often tend to treat surprise, even harmless surprise, like someone throwing a surprise birthday party for them or something, as inherently dangerous. Which, if you were listening to the description, is probably starting to become obvious to you why already. Because somewhere along the line, there was a surprise that likely cost them in some way emotionally. So it created some type of lack of safety in their life, or created some type of danger or created some type of emotional pain that anchored in their brain and into their unconscious that they're feeling like they need to actively fight against. Next, we have number 3, which is the relevance loop. And the signature line for the relevance loop is, back when I was managing this team of 10 people, things moved way smoother than they do now. This person has a fear of fading importance or becoming outdated or replaced or no longer central to the storyline of this company or of this person's life. And often people running this loop tend to reference past stature unprompted or with no other real reason to do it because they're trying to show other people how important they feel like they should be perceived as. And they tend to frame the present against a benchmark that they often react disproportionately to being skipped or bypassed or to being punked or left out of any kind of conversation. Then this moves us to number 4, which is the justification loop. And the signature line here is something along the lines of, I don't think the timing was just right. I'm really waiting for the perfect time for it to happen. And people running this loop tend to explain the why of every decision before anyone even asks for it. They tend to narrate their own past as a patient in a hospital kind of pacing back and forth. And they often even produce justifications faster than the situation actually requires. Next, we have number 5, which is the righteousness loop. And the signature of the righteousness loop is this person tends to use anger or blame as a sort of armor to preserve power and control. Really, this is going to show up principally when other people don't see what that person sees. Because people running this loop tend to frame frustration most of the time as other people's moral failure. And they very often tend to refuse to soften the way that they said something because softening would feel like conceding the principle that they've been fighting for. There's a big need for power and control in these people. And if you're a little bit more familiar with NCI University, maybe you're starting to think about, hey, some of these things look like they're kind of lining up with some of the social needs. And yes, the answer is they absolutely do. And these loops, although they're built out of the decisions and the social needs, can give us greater context and a more nuanced understanding of the actual stories and the emotional loops that are running in people's head that relate to those needs and those decision patterns. I want you to just take one moment to think about which one of those 5 sounded the most like you. The one that you almost don't even want to claim, the one that feels uncomfortable maybe to look at. And while you're at it, which one of those loops sounds like maybe your partner or your mother or your boss or someone else that's close to you in your life? What I want you to see is the loops other people around us tend to be much more visible than our own. And that's not a bug in our brains, I don't think. I think it's an identity armor, and it's kind of our ego protecting itself because it tends to hide best from the person wearing it. But once you can see somebody else's loop, including your own, our temptation is to try to correct it or change it immediately. I want to tell you that this never works. Essentially never. Direct confrontation doesn't dissolve one of these loops. It actually often tends to strengthen it because the loop is their direct identity armor. And attacking the armor tends to make the person defend it. It generates psychological reactance in them and makes them feel like potentially their free will is being jeopardized or taken away from them. There is one single principle that governs everything from here forward. The first thing we want to do is mirror, and then the second thing is to shift after that. The person that you're trying to reach has to feel met before they can actually feel moved. You don't just change somebody's loop because you contradicted it. You change it by first reflecting it back to them more accurately potentially than they ever heard it before, and then after that offering an expansion of their ideology or this emotional loop that they're stuck in that allows them to make their own conscious and free will driven choice to actually grow into this new loop that we're offering them. The first move in this protocol is called an echo injection, or you can just call it echo if you want. And an echo essentially is just a single reflective phrase that mirrors the emotional truth that is underneath that person's loop. And it does that more accurately, very likely, than they've ever heard articulated themselves. This isn't psychological advice, and we're not even trying to interpret what they're feeling. What we're doing is offering precise emotional resonance that allows the person to feel heard and seen in ways that maybe they never have before. And when the echo lands well, two things tend to happen at once. The person's defense very often tends to relax because there's nothing to defend against, and because you haven't attacked their armor. What you've done is actually been able to show them what the armor is protecting underneath that ego facade that they have. What I want to do is give you some examples of echo lines. These are not some magic perfect words that would work for every person in every circumstance and for every person doing the delivery. It's up to you to understand how can you edit these lines I'm going to give you for the particular context that you're in, the environment, as well as just who you are as a person. Everything you say should always feel like a genuine representation of you. So the first one is for the validation loop, and we can say something like, it's wild how much energy most people spend doing invisible work around here. And one thing I've noticed about you is that regardless, you're the kind of person that has just been continuing to show up. Next, let's look at control. We could say something along the lines of, yeah, that's a move people tend to make when chaos has cost them before. And honestly, I don't blame them. For relevance, we could say something along the lines of, to me, that sounds like someone who has really earned their way. Even if others don't realize it, it's clear they've put in so much effort and contributed so much to this organization. For justification, we could say something along the lines of, I think there's a difference between hesitation and discernment, because really what you did in that situation, in my opinion, took real care. And for righteousness, we could say something along the lines of, from what I've noticed, that kind of fire doesn't most of the time show up unless someone's been burned in some way first in their past. What I want you to notice is what each of these does. Fundamentally, they validate the wound that's underneath the loop. Now, the echo is just phase 2 of a 4-phase protocol. Phase 3, which is called the Trojan horse statement, is going to essentially gently introduce an upgraded thought that the person's identity can finally quietly grow into. And phase 4, where we get into identity narration, does the final task of handing them the next line of their own story that person makes their own conscious choice to actually latch onto. Both of these require way deeper rapport than just a single conversation, and we can go fully into the rest of the protocol inside of NCI grad school. Just wanted you to know that this is sort of the tip of the much larger iceberg.